Alright, listen up, cabbies. I got your assignments. Riga, 643. Wheeler, 148. Nardo, 804. And all of you need to join host HP and Father Malone as they examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi. In Night, Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast. Banter, zero, like your boxing record.
Night, Mr. Walters.
Wittingly Media.
What do KISS frontman Paul Stanley and mentalist Uri Geller have in common? They both wittingly or unwittingly recorded their own spoken word albums. What started out in the 1940s as simple performances of classics like A Christmas Carol and Othello later morphed into weirder and more wonderful LPs featuring the likes of Elvis Presley and David Lynch. Tonight, the Noise Junkies discuss one of the more unique musical genres visited upon us. Before the music, there was the word, spoken word. Hello and welcome to Noise Junkies. I am HP, I'm in the captain's seat, and with me as always are my fellow Noise Junkies. First, we have from Mondo, Heather. We have Heather Drain. Heather, how are you?
I'm doing good. I was about to interject. That was a damn fine intro.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And joining us in our little Zoom Brady Bunch quadrant here is the other Noise Junkie, Father Malone. Father Malone, how are you?
I'm well, I suppose. How are you?
I am well, too. Very excited to see you both and excited to dive into the realm of spoken word. Very excited to do this. But first, before we get to the main event, as is our custom, we're going to talk about, do a little show and tell. We're going to talk about what we're listening to this week, artist, album, what have you. I'm going to start with you, Father Malone. Father Malone, what are you listening to lately?
Lately or always? I'm forever listening to this particular album, and it's got its hooks in me again right now. From 1983, Island Records. Speaking of spoken word, Mr. Tom Waits, Swordfish Trombones.
Well, he came home from the war with a party in his head, an idea for a fireworks display. He knew that he'd be ready with a stainless steel machete, half a pound of Valentine's each day.
What an incredible album. I knew of Tom Waits, but hadn't really ever heard him until I got to California. I took this out of the library at USC and immediately made a copy of it and then wore that copy out. It is an incredible album from, how do you even describe Tom Waits? Just a modern day balladeer, honky-tonkin' beat poet. Sort of defies classification, and this album is all of that. It's all of his best instincts. I think it's his best album, probably. Frank's Wild Years Alone. That could be any pick for any of the spoken word selections later in the program.
Drove home, doused everything in the house, torched it. Parked across the street laughing, watching it burn. All Halloween orange and chimney red. And Frank put on a top 40 station. Got on the Hollywood freeway and headed north.
I'd like to say that I like one song over another, but it's a perfect album. I put it on and just listened to it beginning to end, and I have been again recently. Everyone should listen to Tom Waits. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this album.
Oh, absolutely. Fantastic pick. And you're right. Tom Waits, really, he's his own classification. He defies any sort of easy genre. He's been all over the place, but that's a wonderful pick.
I love that pick. That was actually my second Tom Waits album. The Black Rider was my gateway drug.
Wow.
And that was love. I was immediately hooked into that. And with all of its sort of like Bowery Brechtian charm, but then Swordfish Trombones was number 2, and as all she wrote. I love Tom Waits. Love. I will defend him to my dying day. I actually once ruined a party. Well, I don't think I ruined it, but in college, I actually got in an argument with a guy because he was trying to be an edgelord. And it wasn't even like he was like, oh, I don't like Tom Waits because of this or that. Like, I'm not, everybody's taste is different. If you can intelligently just be like, yeah, it's just not my flavor, cool. No harm, no foul. But if you're gonna be all like, you know, just like a dumbass and just trying to be like that, I will educate you. I was more obnoxious about it then because when you're 18, that's a good age to be the obnoxious, pretentious girl at a party.
Oh, that's a great age to be passionate about music anyway, right? That's really when you're sort of becoming, I mean, for me, that's when I really started to assume it as a real identity. Speaking of...
you can't really be pretentious when you're discussing Tom Waits. It's just... If I may double back for a second, like I don't have a particular favorite song on the album, but the song that made me realize that I loved this man is the last song on the first side, which is called In the Neighborhood, which is this like German oompa brass backing to what is effectively the most mundane neighborhood activities.
The kids can get ice cream because the market burned down. The newspaper sleeping bags blow down the lane, and the goddamn flatbeds got me pinned in again. In the neighborhood.
Elevated it to like mythic status, and I thought, Jesus Christ, this guy's hilarious.
All right, Heather, how about you go next? What's been spinning on your turntable lately?
Well, lately, I have been completely transfixed and enchanted by an EP that came out 2021 by a band called Lycia. And Lycia, you can call them dark wave, you can call them goth, I call them electronic, acoustic, whatever. I just call them good. They were formed in 1989, I believe, by Mike Van Portfleet, and the core trio of the band is him, Tara Van Flower, who's also done some incredible solo work, and David Gallas. And this EP, which is under the title of Casa Luna, it's dreamy. It's at parts you feel like you're surrounded by nature right as a storm is about to hit, just like when the sky gets kind of like purpley and thick, but there's kind of like a sweet beauty to it. There's just a lot of layers going on. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. In fact, it's so beautiful that I actually have written an article about it, and it's currently on my Patreon. It may or may not show up later on at my website, but I adore this album, and it's on Spotify. In fact, Lycia's discography is on there, and I highly encourage people to check it out. And a little trivia, one of their biggest fans, that was Peter Steele, legendary frontman of Typo Negative. And in fact, Tara does backup vocals on the song Halloween in Heaven, which was off their last album. So it's a great song. So Dead Again, that was the album. But yeah, Casa Luna, gorgeous. And one of the songs is there's a song called Do You Bleed? And if you're a fan of artists like Jarboe, particularly like her work with Neurosis, like this will hit your sweet spot. And the other songs are a little more just sort of like sad, but there's just it's a beauty. There's such a beauty and intensity to this work and to this band, and yeah, I cannot recommend it enough.
It sounds like a nice choice as we're moving from fall into winter. Things are getting kind of cold. It's my favorite season of the year, but it's a good season for that kind of bruised beauty, if you will. It sounds really
that. Cool. Yeah,
I'll definitely check it out on Spotify. So my pick this week, just a little bit of background before I launch into it. When I was in college, I got into a band called King of Fools. Someone had recommended them to me because they said the vocalist sounded a lot like Bowie. And it was kind of a nice introduction to the band, like a way of easing into it is with something familiar like David Bowie. And it's true. The vocalist, his name is Roy White, sounds a lot like Bowie. And the album was kind of almost like taking Tin Machine, but softening some of the edges. It wasn't quite as angular and kind of intense as that. So anyway, I knew that this guy, Roy White, had other bands before that, but I could never find any information on them. He had a band in the early 80s called White and Torch. It was a band that he did with a guy named Steve Torch, who, trivia note, he was later one of the many credited writers on Cher's Believe, which is weird if you've ever heard of this band. But so the band White and Torch, they just recorded a bunch of singles, but they never actually had a proper album for a variety of reasons I'm not going to go into. But I kind of forgot about them. And then I was doing some searching for Scott Walker. I got into Scott Walker a little bit, got into a Scott Walker thing over the past week. And the YouTube algorithm spit out White and Torch. I never knew they were there, but they spit out this a video for this song called Parade, which was one of their it's probably their biggest hit. People in the know, this is the one people always point to and say, wow, this band should have been something. They should have been bigger than they were. But the song was produced by Paul Buckmaster. He's done a lot of work he's worked with the Stones, Leonard Cohen, Elton John. This song was recorded in Abbey Road. It's got this beautiful, lush orchestral arrangement. I would put them, it's sort of angsty, gothy, sort of pop, but with a great sort of arrangement behind it, a lot of passion. But the thing that knocked me out was, this is the guy that I thought sounded like David Bowie in 1991. Back then in 82, for the song Parade, he's doing a Scott Walker thing, which is, it's like, it hit me all at once. It's like seeing David Bowie's evolution in microcosm. Like, this guy started out as a Scott Walker kind of intense kind of vocalist, and he later went into, it kind of blew my mind that these two great sort of influences on me, my favorite sort of musicians, were all kind of encapsulated in this guy, Roy White. But it's a fantastic song. It's very nakedly passionate and theatrical, which I really love about it. And I really got into this song. I couldn't stop listening. I still can't stop listening to it. I've chased up more of their material, White and Torch. I think they have like 15 or so singles that you can find on YouTube, but this is by far the best. And like I said, this is pointed to as their best single. In fact, it was even featured on Series 4 of the UK version of X Factor. In fact, I think the runner-up performed it as his final song. So it's got legs. I mean, people know this song, and actually the guy put it on his third album. So it had a little bit of juice, at least in I guess it's like the early or the mid 2000s. But I would recommend anyone check this out. It's really, anyone who likes Scott Walker, that sort of intense, brooding intensity, check this song out. You won't be disappointed. It's fantastic.
How have you not shared this with me prior? I like Scott Walker. I like David Bowie. What's wrong with you, HB?
I will talk about David Bowie.
I know this is a neat follow along to the last episode, but it'll be in the playlist. He did So the version that you're going to cut into this is the original one. On Spotify, this guy, Roy White, re-recorded it at some point. So it's on Spotify, this particular song, but it doesn't match like the beauty of the original recording, I have to say.
Gotcha.
So there is that. But, and by the way, if you check out, there's a great performance video. It's sort of like they're lip syncing. I think it's an English sort of talk show that they're performing on, but check it out because there's a woman playing piano in the background who looks just like Kate Bush with a Bobby Brown microphone. It's the weirdest thing in the world. But anyway, I digress. Nevertheless, now let's get into our main discussion. We're here to talk about spoken word tonight. For me personally, just as by way of introduction, I feel like I was a little bit pre-programmed to enjoy spoken word at an early age because I can remember as a kid, I had a little record player that I used to carry around. And one of my favorite records as a kid was Dr. Seuss's Fox and Socks and Green Eggs and Ham. It was a double, like one side was Green Eggs and Ham, the other side was Fox and Socks.
Here's an easy thing to say. New socks, two socks, whose socks, Sue's socks.
So I loved Marvin Miller. He did all the voices in it, and he had this wonderful recitation of these Dr. Seuss classic books, and it really kept me enthralled as a child. And I didn't really understand what spoken word was. I didn't have a name for it, obviously, but I think formatively, I really appreciated like the idea of having a poetic performance, if you will, on record. So that was kind of my introduction to spoken word. But I'm curious, you two fine folks, what were some of your early formative influences around spoken word, the things that got you interested in spoken word as a general concept? I'm going to start with you, Heather.
Oh, no. I was afraid of that. So I have to confess, the spoken word genre is one that's not really enchanted me. Like, because even the artists that are classical spoken word artists that I love, I tend to would almost just rather either read their work or see like a video of them performing it. I'm not even a big fan of like audiobooks. I don't know what it is about my brain. I would rather do the reading or have it in a visual and sonic context. So, because even as a kid, I mean, when you're a kid, I remember I had like a little Gremlins 45, but I would usually just like not play it and just find my mom's copy of Panama by Van Halen. And I would play that while reading about Gizmo's shenanigans. But that's why I'm really curious and I'm eager about this episode because I think the cool thing about having a good discussion, especially with like people. Like, I'm the like coast the world because like not only like they're you two friends, but like you guys, your knowledge, you both have like this great knowledge and great taste. And so I'm always open to be open-minded to these things, but I'm not a big spoken word fan. The ones that I like that you might call that, there is one of my picks, and I won't mention obviously which, I don't want to spoil it, but there is one I did pick that is a classical, what you call a classical spoken word piece. Like, the other three is probably nebulous, but
no, I'm excited though. I mean, but it's interesting because what you bring up is there's like this sort of, it's not really a debate, but there's this notion. Some people believe that poetry should be heard and not read. Some people feel the opposite. So it's, I guess, a lot of where you land within spoken word, and if you're looking at it specifically as poetry, I think informs that choice of whether it's something you're really into or not. I always fell into the category of I love to hear the poetry in the poet's voice. I think you gain a lot from hearing that, which is not to say, by the way, that a lot of my choices can be put into the broad category of poetry, but I guess you can loosely term this as spoken word poetry written by the poet. But that's good. How about yourself, Father Malone?
Well, I have to echo you, HP. I wasn't necessarily toting a record player around. By the way, when you described your younger self with the record player and the record, like I just imagined you on the streets of Brooklyn throwing down the thing, like walking up like to a DJ set and putting down your record and putting on Fox and Socks. Anyway.
Wicked, yeah.
There was an LP I had as a child. I actually tracked it down and I own it again. It's called Famous Ghost Stories. And it's,
nice.
So, like 4 tales on each side. The pinnacle of it being a reading, a recitation of the Telltale Heart. When I was in kindergarten and kids were, for nap time, you would bring in a record of music you would play. And I brought in the Telltale Heart for the other kindergarten.
That is awesome.
To drift off to sleep to.
You would have laughed to see how cunningly I did it. Very, very slowly, so that I could see him as he lay on his bed. Would a madman have been as wise as this?
So that sort of whet my appetite, which led almost immediately into the chilling, thrilling sounds of the Haunted House, the Disney album from 1964. Yes. So
I have that.
Of course, we all do. I have 5 copies of it. I buy it every time I see it. I can't. It's compulsive. It's awful.
That's fucking awesome.
So in that, we have like a female narrator leading us through these atmospheres and really introducing us to specific sound effects, which is perfect for me because I'm so obsessed with both.
You must reach the other side, and carefully you step out onto the bridge. It sways dangerously with your weight, but it seems safe enough.
I think those two primed that particular pump. I didn't really understand I had some albums of recitations of straight up like Basil Rathbone reads Sherlock Holmes, and I had a Basil Rathbone read Edgar Allan Poe too, actually. But it wasn't until college for me and HP around the early 90s, I suppose. And it was HP who was very deep into Henry Rollins. So he would play a lot of Henry Rollins spoken word stuff, which that vacillated between the poetry and the sort of just him being a raconteur. But oh man, the poetry remains. I can't think of Christmas without thinking of you, HP, and Family Man.
Family Man, with your Christmas lights already up. You're such a man when you're putting up your Christmas lights. First on the block, Family Man.
I think that was my real first introduction to it, but I didn't get obsessed with spoken word as such until I heard Gil Scott-Heron.
Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the Moon? How come I ain't got no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor bills. Air mail special.
Once I heard him, that got me hooked. And then an album I bought in 1995, which I'm going to talk about when we get to our picks as well. That was my intro, and I dig it. I love listening to people recite things and perform things. And
yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up Henry Rollins, because that really was when I will echo exactly what you said, is where I really fell for spoken word as kind of an art form. It was a great time to sort of dive into that because, as you said, Henry Rollins, his star was on the rise. Rollins' band was a monster band at the time. They were on Lollapalooza the first year, and he was just putting out spoken word and poetry books and all this material that I dove into like head first. I loved it all, but before all of that, like, I didn't even know that he had that side of him because I only knew about Rollins' band up to that point, and Black Flag, obviously, but I wasn't much of a fan at that point. But then somebody in my college dorm in 91 had said, hey, he had this album, Family Man, that you referenced. And it like kind of blew my mind. I mean, at first we would goof on it a little bit because it's all so self-serious.
You and I would goof for years and years on it and how silly it was. And yet
it stuck with us. I mean, even though it's kind of, he loved to propagate this image that Rollins would go to this shed that he lived in and write. And he was this negative, the world suck, all this kind of stuff. But Family Man stuck with me. And I that whole first side, it's really two sides broken up. Like one side is Rollins doing sort of spoken word, and the other side is just the band doing instrumental stuff, Greg Ginn and so forth. But Family Man is fantastic. He had a track called Armageddon Man, which kind of splits the difference. It's sort of him doing his version of slam poetry that you brought up earlier, Heather. And it's great. It's almost like this journey. But that's really what kickstarted it. And I'm so happy also to hear you talk about Gil Scott-Heron, because I didn't get into Gil Scott-Heron until much, much later, I think after I graduated college, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I loved all of his stuff. He had a great flow. He really was sort of the prototypical rapper. fantastic, but he was everything he rapped about was very relatable, which I think is really important to really connect to the material. Why don't we go ahead? Let's dive into our choices. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to do, we're going to talk about our favorite spoken word album, and then we're going to go into the weirdest. We're going to have two of each. We're going to go into favorite, then weirdest, then break it up with a little quiz of my concoction, and then we'll go into our other two choices. So let's start out here. We're going to talk about our favorite spoken word LP. And this time, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Heather. I'm going to go to Father Malone first. What is your first pick for favorite spoken word LP?
I mentioned I picked up a CD in 1995. It came out in 95. And I actually bought it at a little record store in Santa Monica called Moby Disc, which is long gone, and also long lamented. Great store, great staff. They were all musicians. They all knew the best shit that was coming down. They would know you and what your tastes were, and they certainly knew mine because they immediately handed me a record from Research Magazine. Remember Research Magazine, the film?
Oh my God!
Yeah,
that's gonna come up later on for me.
So, Volume 2 of Incredibly Strange Music. Oh my God. If you in that year came to see a movie at the movie theater I played at, no doubt you were hearing this before the movie began, this album. It opened up a whole, I thought I knew what the underground was. I thought I knew all the cool stuff. I didn't know a goddamn thing. I was a dumb kid. This album opened up a lot of doors for me, including one I didn't even realize until tonight when I was re-looking at the track list, because I have not heard this particular album in 20 years at least. In the interim, I myself have become obsessed with the sort of Hawaiian guitar music from the 50s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I own a vast Polynesian and Hawaiian collection. My favorite album of which is a guy named Billy Muir, who was this like DJ in Cleveland, who he slings the hardest goddamn Hawaiian guitar I've ever heard. And I've been obsessed with that guy ever since. Turns out one of his tracks was on this Research album. But more important, it contained a track by Mr. Del Close and Mr. John Brent from an album called How to Speak Hip.
Hey, look, if you bought this record to learn how to speak hip from a record man, that is the squarest thing I ever heard of. I mean, wow. But look, so you bought it, you must need it. So that was a smart move, you know what I mean, or something?
Hello there, and welcome to the exciting world of hip.
Just relax, baby. Me and this other cat, we're going to straighten you out.
It was released back in 1959 on Mercury Records. It's in high fidelity. Boy, if you listen to it with headphones on, you're going to hear that. It's a parody of what was at that time all the rage, continued to be for at least 20 or so years, which is the how-to album. Those proliferated in the 1950s. So these two guys noticed that, and they also noticed that there was an entire new language being spoken, an entire new culture, which is beatnik culture, and that a lot of straight people had no fucking idea what anyone was saying. So they figured they'd do a how-to record on that. So it's an album that's broken into a series of lessons by Close as the narrator, with the aid of an actual hipster, Mr. Geets Romo, played by John Brent. Now, I mentioned it's high fidelity. Close is in your left ear. Brent is in your right ear.
Do you hipsters regard squares as the enemy?
Oh, no, man. Squares are cool. Enemy if they attack you one way or another. But you've got to have them. They run the subways like it's not their fault. It's just the bag they're in.
It's disorienting. Now, Del Close, if you're already hip, you know who he is. But he is effectively the father of modern improvisational comedy. There were groups before him, but he belonged to most of them, including Second City, which he helped found, the Compass Players. But it was Close's obsession with transforming what were effectively theater games into a workable narrative that changed the comedy world. Him and Charna Halpern, who was his partner, assistant, whatever, they basically gave birth to the Herald, which is the blueprint for all improvisational comedy, where each of your little improvisations add up to a whole. That brand of comedy has dominated for the past 50 years, and it's really all thanks to Mr. Del Close. He's also got a perfect announcer voice. Speaking of just the album here, he's got this Midwest drawl that hides behind this veneer of erudite but not pretentious. It's a fantastic voice on his own, and he should have had a bigger career in voiceovers if he weren't so fucking obsessed with live theater. But John Brent playing Keats Romo, oh my goodness. He's the star of the show, obviously, because he gets all the cool, hip lingo. If you've ever seen Symphony and Slang, it's an old Tex Avery cartoon where it's a character spouting all this jargon and they make it literal by animating it, you'll get some idea of what this album is like. But Close is the real hero here. He absolutely shines because he's got the straight man role, but he comes off as this guy like genuinely trying to understand this new cultural world as it spirals away from him. And he doesn't ever seem desperate, but he seems like he has a longing to understand this new generation. The whole thing beginning to end to this day is very, very funny. Evidently, Brian Wilson quoted this album all the time. There's a line where John Brent says,
"And then we'll get, world peace."
So that's my first choice. Del Close, John Brent. You can hear the entirety of it on YouTube. You can hear it on Spotify. I'm going to have links to a lot of it. So please check it out.
That is such a fantastic pick. I cannot believe, I should have guessed that you were going to pick that because I know how much you love Del Close. And it's it's funny. I mean, because spoken word, it's such a broad definition. It doesn't have to be someone delivering poetry or something like that, something very staid. I mean, it really encompasses comedy, a lot of fun stuff. My favorite trivia note about Del Close, by the way, is correct me if I'm wrong, Father Malone, didn't he will his skull to like a school for drama in Chicago after he died so they could use it for Hamlet productions?
Correct. Yeah, the University of Chicago. He now plays the role of Yorick.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. That is like the raddest thing I have ever heard.
This might be apocryphal, but supposedly his final words were, "I'm tired of being the funniest one in the room."
I choose to believe that's true.
100% believe that to be true.
I don't have any tattoos, but if I get one, it's going to be a tribute to this man. Holy shit. That's fucking awesome.
He's you might have seen him if you watched the remake of The Blob from 1988, Chuck Russell's remake of The Blob. He's the preacher in the film. He's also in Brian De Palma's The Untouchables. He's the one who comes to bribe them.
You fellas are untouchable. Is that the thing? No one can get to you?
You tell Capone.
Hey, everyone can be gotten to.
Then I'll see him in hell.
She gets a titular line.
Yeah.
She gets a titular line.
Yeah.
I love it.
He's great. He's so fantastic. Wonderful choice. Which brings us to you, Heather. What is your first pick for favorite spoken word album?
I'm very excited. I didn't even, and see, this is proof that expanding how one views a category, because I didn't even think of Haunted House Records, which I am an immense fan of and listen to year round. And of course, I purposely not picked comedy because I thought that would be too easy. But you mentioned research, and one of my golden goddesses is Rusty Warren, who's not on my list.
If there were a naughty network in existence on TV, here are some of the programs I'm sure that we might see. First, there'd be a live spectacular on that television screen, featuring lusty, lurid scenes from Confidential magazine. Then a daily drama with sparkle, sex, and fizz, starring all the greats of showbiz called I Married Liz.
Everybody should have a shrine to the queen of knockers up herself, Rusty Warren. And that's also a reference from my friend Steven. So if he ever listens to this, that's our queen, our saint, Rusty Warren. But Rusty's not my pick here. Tonight, my pick number one, and this is an album I love so much from one of my bands that I love so much. This was a band when I first heard them. It's like when DNA meets DNA. Like it's like you see a part of yourself that nobody else sees or recognizes or can identify. And that is The Residents, the San Francisco, but originally from Louisiana. And I often think that few can do high weirdness quite like anybody from the South, because it's a weird ass region. And I can say that as a Southerner. But The Residents, we could do, and probably will at some point, do a whole episode on them, because their body of work is riveting. It's vast. It's diverse, and
it's really formidable. I mean, it's
prolific.
I've taken, because they were on Rykodisc. They had a whole reissue campaign when Bowie had his stuff come out on Rykodisc, and I used to see their stuff in catalogs what you get with the CD, and I tried to kind of, because it looked really cool. I mean, these guys and these eyeballs and these top hats and everything. But to be honest, like, I tried to get into it as a high school student. It was way over my head at the time. Maybe it's time to revisit it.
I was probably like I don't know if I was in high school. I was like 18, 19. But the Residents definitely, I mean, it's a band not for everybody, and I can definitely see, I tried to get people. That was a band I tried to foolishly get people into, and it didn't go well for me. But one of my favorite albums of theirs, and one that I think I'm going to say is a spoken word album because it's a narrative story, and that is their album God in Three Persons.
Oh, I was down beneath the bottom when my vacant staring caught 'em gaily parading up and down the street. Followed by some stinking masses, spraying fumes and giving gases to the brown and nearly worn out air.
And the Residents before this, we're not strangers necessarily to doing storytelling. I mean, they had the Mole trilogy, where you've had this whole story about the Proles, who are basically the moles living underground that are very sort of almost like an indigenous parallel, and they end up getting kind of exploited for work source by the Chubs, who live above ground.
Where have I failed you? But give up? Never. Not as long as there are souls imprisoned in the dark light. Not as long as a whisper of life clings to my body. There will be freedom in the holes. All will hail the new machine.
They did 3 albums on that. Those were great. And of course, they did a film that I don't think it was ever quite finished, called Whatever Happened to Violinist Fats, which they made with Graham Whiffler, who worked on a number of their music videos. But God in Three Persons is basically this tale of this man named Mr. X, who the descriptor online compares him to sort of Colonel Parker. I just view him as kind of just like a drifter, almost like quasi Elmer Gantry kind of, Southern drifter who meets these 2 conjoined twins and that have powers. They have like telepathic powers, and he becomes transfixed and kind of wants to exploit that power in a carny way, but is also legit kind of enthralled by them, and ends up getting very mixed up because he develops lust for the female twin. But the thing is, like, this album and the twins themselves are very fluid gender-wise. Like, there's a fluid sexuality. The whole story it's like Flannery O'Connor meets Catherine Dunn, who wrote the incredible book Geek Love, which I can't recommend enough.
Drawn into a situation that with some consideration never would fulfill its smile and smell. But there was no hesitation in my step, or in my making sure the door was quiet when it closed.
The music behind it, because that's the thing, I'm a music girl at heart. Like, if you mix in music with something, you got me. Like, it's like Roses, but better. Yeah, because Roses die, but music lives. And but the storytelling, the narration, I believe it sounds like Homer Flynn playing Mr. X. Of course, the great thing about the Residents is there's always a lot of nebulousness as far as like whose identity is what. But I think it's an incredible album. It's also an interesting one in their point in this career, because this is, I want to say, 87, and this was the last album they would ever record on tape. But it was the first album that they had specifically planned to release on CD first, which that's still pretty early in the technology. But the Residents were always very forward-thinking with technology. Like, they were one of the first groups to like experiment and play around with like computer-generated imagery for their videos, and this is like early 80s. So yeah, but it's also on kind of a more sad note. They originally were going to have Snakefinger, who Philip Snakefinger Lithman was an ambidextrous guitarist, a guitar legend for me. Snakefinger's amazing, brilliant brilliant fucking guitarist, and I do recommend his solo work. And he was going to add guitar parts to it, and he died. And so that was never to be. And I always feel like this point onwards, their career changes without Snakefinger a little bit, like sonically, because he was like such a pivotal contributor. And he was one of the few kind of associated members of the Ralph Records Residence Corps that wasn't like under a pseudonym or anonymous. So, but yeah, I just God in Three Persons. I think it's an incredible story. It's an incredible album. I know they've done a few sort of like stage productions of it in more recent years, but you don't even, this is what I don't think you necessarily even need the visuals, because it's so evocative. This would be, as much as I said earlier, I don't like audiobooks. I guess that's a lie. It depends on how you do it, right? Because this is a story that it's fucking great. And yeah, listen to it.
I think that might have been the CD that I took a stab at listening to The Residents with. I think probably because it was described as a concept album in some way or a story, but I'm guessing my 16, 17-year-old brain just wasn't prepared for all of the craziness of that, but I'll definitely check it out. I'll revisit it for sure. That sounds awesome. As for myself, my choice for a favorite spoken word LP, my first choice is An American Prayer by Jim Morrison and the Doors.
Choose, they croon, the ancient ones, the time has come again. Choose now, they croon, beneath the moon, beside an ancient lake. Enter again the sweet forest, enter the hot dream, come with us. Everything is broken up in dances.
Father Malone and I were big Doors fans in high school, and I remember one time going to the Record Exchange in Salem, this used record place, and I had just bought up everything I could find on the Doors, every tape. It was all on cassette at that time. And then one day I found this cassette called An American Prayer with this picture of Morrison in a beard. And it looked different than all the other Doors albums. And this was pre-internet, so I couldn't really find out what was this all about. It wasn't one of the big ones like Morrison Hotel or Strange Days. I knew it wasn't one of the main ones. And I knew it wasn't even one of the two that came out after he died. They put out 2 records after he died, and they both stiffed. So I bought it, basically just taking it on faith that this wasn't some kind of weird bootleg. Even if it had been, it would have been kind of cool to check it out. But I bought it, and no way of knowing that this is probably, this may end up being my favorite Doors album of all time, which I know is a lot to say. But so way before Free as a Bird, when the Beatles resurrected a deceased John Lennon and put him alongside modern day Paul McCartney and George Harrison, even before Hank Williams Jr. sang "There's a Tear in My Beer" with his father that had died when he was 4 years old.
There's a tear in my beer, 'cause I'm crying for you, dear.
The Doors, the surviving Doors, I should say, did this they had already called it quits by 1973 after, like I said, their 2 post-Morrison albums had gone belly up and hadn't done a thing. But they reconvened in 1978 to do this sort of project using he had recorded some spoken word by himself at odd times during when he was still alive, obviously. And they set about taking those tapes and creating an album, not just an album with them backing him up, but really took great care into making it an audio experience, a little bit like an audio movie, if you will. And the interesting thing is the album really kind of takes you through, poetically, not literally, but it basically starts out with Morrison as a child.
Can we resolve the past, lurking jaws, joints of time, the base, to come of age in a dry place, holes and caves? My friend drove an hour each day from the mountains. The bus gives you a hard-on with books in your lap.
The progression of the album goes through his early childhood into him sort of striking out on his own, living in California, taking him through those years, and USC as a poet on the rise through his ascent with the Doors.
Tight-lipped losers and lustful fuck salesmen, my militant dandies, all strange order of monsters, hot on the trail of the wood vine, we welcome you to our procession.
And then finally, it ends with adage. It's his death. But they're using all of this great poetry that he'd recorded. He recorded an American Prayer, which was one of his books, basically. They recorded all new music behind him. They were smart enough not to, and the technology didn't exist for them to actually take his vocals and kind of beat match them. So a lot of it was really kind of him reciting poetry and reciting these sort of stories just behind a freeform backing by the surviving Doors. But they also used pre-existing music. They used Peace Frog. They did Texas Radio and the Big Beat. They used Unknown Soldier. The remaining members of the band still had great musical chemistry. It's clear, like I said, that a lot of care went into the crafting of this album. I mean, even now, this kind of thing happens where this just happened. John Lennon just came back on the Now and Then song with the Beatles, the so-called last Beatles song, and people are still kind of looking at that as a little unseemly. Like, is that what John Lennon really would like? And there's no getting around the fact that Morrison didn't intend these spoken word pieces to be part of a Doors album. He very specifically was going to do this outside of the Doors. In fact, he had approached Lalo Schifrin, the composer, to contribute backing for what he had hoped would be a solo record of sorts, which I thought was an interesting bit of trivia. Despite that, like I said, for me, this album has really had legs because it really is an experience. It's not a record that you can just listen to this song or that song out of context. It really kind of demands that you sit down and listen to it from beginning to end, and it takes you through this sort of journey, which I really like. It's something very unique, I think. It's a fascinating record. It's even really poignant at times. And as a side note, not that this is any measure of quality, but it was nominated for the 1980 Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Album. So take that for what it's worth. It was only available on cassette and record for years and years. And in 95, they finally put it out on CD with a couple of bonus tracks, which I was delighted by. But you can check this out on Spotify. I'm sure it'll be in the playlist. And yeah, if you're a fan of the Doors, if you like interesting poetry, if you like something that's a little more of a movie, a movie for your ears.
Yes, I like that album very much as well. Am I Going to Die, HB?
Father Malone and I had a period where we were making music and doing a lot of sampling. And that was one of the things that I sampled was Jim Morrison saying, "Am I going to die?" over and over. We talked about our first favorite. Now I want to talk about the weirdest. We're looking for, now this doesn't mean that this is your another favorite. This may even be something that you don't even like very much, but it's just the weirdest, off the wall, kookiest idea, kookiest execution, what have you.
I don't know, you said kooky, and all I can think about is Ed Byrne.
Well, now, let's take it from the top, grab some wheels. We're wailing on and talk about some cuckoo deals.
But kooky, lend me your car.
Like, that song was a novelty, and there was a parody called Spooky.
Spooky, lend me your tune.
For me, of course, the weird is going to be also my favorite because that's just how I roll. And Father Malone, when you mentioned research, my heart jumped up, sang, did a pirouette, and just grew 5 times its original size. Research, I never had access to the magazine, but the books, particularly their Incredibly Strange Film book and the 2 volumes of Incredibly Strange Music books, were tantamount to Bibles for me as a teenager. Absolutely pivotal reading for me. And I was lucky enough to find, it took me a lot longer to find volume 2, but the companion CDs for these 2 volumes are fantastic. And so when you mentioned Billy Muir, I immediately was like, ooh, I know what that is. Because my number 2 pick is an artist that is also on volume 2 of Incredibly Strange Musics. And that is a man named Eden Abes, who was known as Abby to his friends. And Eden, and in fact, there looks like there is a documentary being made about him. There's a really good looking trailer for it on YouTube. Eden is a fascinating cat. This guy, born in 1908, was Some would call him a proto-hippie. He was very much into naturalism, like living off the land, had long hair and a beard, and probably arguably one of the most conformist eras I guess society's always been conformist, but particularly in the 40s and 50s, vegetarian. But however, in 1948, he kind of got known to like the masses because he penned a song called Nature Boy, which would be covered by Nat King Cole. In fact, Nat King Cole's version was #1 for 8 weeks.
A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he.
Yeah, he was a yogi, and just it's surreal when you see pictures of Eden, particularly from this period, because he looks like a hippie, but this is the 40s. So it's so fascinating. But it would take a few years for Eden to release his solo album, which is 1960's Eden's Island, the music of the Enchanted Isle.
There's a land that is great and is grand. There's no fear and no pain. We will all live again, and everyone will find the ones they love.
This is a beautiful piece of exotica, first of all. If you're like me, I love exotica. I live for it. This is just some of the music that puts me in the most happy place is going to be exotica. And not all of this is spoken words. I'm cheating a little bit, but some of it is. And there's a number of tracks that have Eden reciting his poetry with this music. And the track that I would highlight from this is Full Moon, which is also the one on the Cop, but it is just it's a simple tale about seaside living and just valuing nature over sort of the bigger ill-gotten gains of a capitalist lifestyle, being poor but happy.
The new moon and the full moon, the tides, the wind, and the rain, to surf and comb the beach and gather seashells and driftwood and know the thrill of loneliness and lose all sense of time and be free. To hike over the island to the village.
Granted, it's a lot easier to be poor and happy when you live in a warmer climate.
Paradise.
Yeah. If you live in paradise.
I'll just walk down to the lagoon because I got nothing to do. Okay, how horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lifestyle that would later on also be praised by a band called Mungo Jerry in the summertime. I am totally going to get haunted by Eden Alvis's ghost now for invoking Mungo Jerry. But in seriousness, Eden's Island, I think it's a very cool album. His story, he lived until 1995, and he was killed by he was in a car wreck. So this guy obviously was living right, and just kind of a fascinating cult figure. And he always maintained this lifestyle. This wasn't a fad. Nobody can accuse Eden of selling out. This man was the real deal. I'm looking forward to that documentary. Definitely. And if you love exotica, if you love pseudo spiritual nature-based poetry, which I have a little crunchy granola, I guess, in me. I'm more spacey, really, because I love Hawkwind. But yeah, definitely check it out. It's a cool album.
By the way, another cover of Nature Boy, very underrated, Leonard Nimoy.
A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he.
Holy
Nature
shit.
Boy.
Speaking
And
of space.
Music from outer space. I love.
Oh my god! I didn't even know the album was called that. Oh my god! I will be checking that out ASAP.
You should. I love that we're all talking about, or you guys are talking about, incredibly strange music and research and all that, because I remember it's one of those things. I remember there was a cool bookstore on campus in college, Vaughn's, and they had all kinds of crazy cool books and records and everything. And that's where I came across incredibly strange music and researched the books. But it was one of those things where I kind of felt like I was the only one who would ever come across this stuff, because it was just so like, it wasn't prominently featured. You had to like go down and find it, this crazy, it was just, it really felt like something that spoke to me uniquely. But I think we all had a similar experience finding this exotica and all this kind of interesting sort of detritus over the years. So very cool. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna take the second spot on this. Talk about the weirdest spoken word that I've come across. And this one I know is going to speak to you particularly, Heather, because Mort Garson is prominently involved.
Yes.
So this, I did not go with Was It Of Is. That would be too easy. Mort Garson's going to maybe get his own show eventually. He's going to be featured elsewhere.
Yeah.
I'm going to save that.
Exotica, apparently. We're going to have an Exotica program.
Yeah.
Apparently. But this particular, and I'm cheating a little bit because it's not one album or one song, one album. It is 12. I'm talking about the Signs of the Zodiac series from 1969.
Capricorn's moon in Taurus is the case of the goat and the bull coming up with a horseshoe. This combination appears to be a lucky one, and when good luck produces success, you are impatient to share the fruits with others.
Dude, that was my runner-up. No joke, because like particularly the voluptuary track, Taurus, which is also my sign. I've been listening to that. Oh my god. Twinkies. I've been listening to that track a lot. Like, oh, that's a great pick.
Wow. Yeah. So I obviously, there's no getting around the fact I'm a huge Mort Garson fan, and I came across this a few years ago. It was music by Mort Garson and script written and directed by Jacques Wilson, who also did Was It Of Is. What I love about this and where it gets the weirdest pick is it was a series of 12 albums, one for every sign of the zodiac, from Aquarius to Virgo. Each one was made just for you, and each one came with a moon chart specific to that sign in question. I mean, they didn't do this halfway. I mean, it was in the inside slipcover, and I wrote this down. It said, quote, "With the release of this series, A&M Records acknowledges the birth of a new renaissance among people everywhere, especially among people who have opened their minds to see beyond the ordinary and recognize the true relationship between man and the universe." That's poetry right there. Just forget about the album.
That was off Eden's album. That's
So, like I said, each album basically featured the same 8 tracks, and each one, there was one about how to deal with love from and as that particular sign.
For this moment is nothing to take lightly. Love must be a meaningful thing, and one does not scatter their roses. You move into it carefully, with an eye to where it's going and a desire to make it last. For in love, as in all things, Taurus must feel he's building something.
Or whether you should work for or hire someone who had that sign.
The mature lion is ready to assume command. His belief in his worth rises until he gains recognition for the person he truly is and for the values he most deeply possesses.
And how the various moons affected that sign's essential qualities. But also, this is great. I didn't know this until I did the research. So there were 3 narrators that basically traded off speaking duties in these albums. Each one, it's just fascinating. The first one is an actress named Nancy Pretty, who also happened to be the mother of Christina Applegate.
I have seen you, Cancer, making your daily journey between heaven and hell, running the emotional scale, making a symphony of every note, ringing it dry.
It's bizarre.
Wow.
The second one is an actor named John Irwin. He's better known later in life as the voice of He-Man in the popular TV series.
What?
The Libran has theories on everything, and you'll hear them all. Nevertheless, his powers of concentration are legendary. And when the scales tip toward the work side, his output is tremendous.
The third narrator is an actor named Michael Bell.
In one job, you serve the cause of work. In one cause, you serve all causes. In one love, you know all love. For the Aquarian has the greatest contribution to make. It is the talent for seeing beyond notion to truth.
He is, among other jobs, do you know who Michael Bell is?
Of course.
Father Malone?
I've seen, he was in an episode of Night Gallery recently. He's in the Star Trek pilot Encounter at Farpoint. He's the villain at the end who's holding those aliens hostage. He's the voice of every cartoon character you've ever heard from Saturday morning.
He was also the voice, he did the dubbing for Peter Criss with Kids Meets the Phantom of the Park.
My God! You like, be careful, Catman.
I me bucko with a scurvy crew steaming close behind, and I do mean steaming.
They are serious. Yeah, because Peter Criss refused to come back and do the looping, so they had Michael Bell come in and do all of his lines. That alone was worth the price of admission. But when you listen to this, I'm very heavy, obviously, as I talked about American Prayer, on experience. And feeling like you're getting taken on a journey. And there's no better way to feel like you're sort of sitting in a darkened room, maybe lit by a black light and the finest velvet paintings on the wall, maybe one of those, maybe a lava lamp shining in the corner. And it just really gives you that vibe. I mean, I don't know who actually bought this record. I suspect they probably missed the mark. Probably any self-respecting hippie probably avoided this because it was a little square even for 1969. But beyond that, the music itself is typically wonderful work from Mort Garson. There's some really great melodies and great stuff on there. And overall, it's just a great time capsule of the 60s. The reason why this hit my list of the weirdest is just I just admire the immense scale of this to take one album for every sign of the zodiac and how comprehensive the whole thing is. I just thought it was, really, really a wonderfully crazy, ambitious project to take on. Father Malone, what is your first choice for the weirdest spoken word around?
Well, mine dovetails nicely into yours, not necessarily the album or the content or anything, but in the segue of late 1960s new agey spiritualism that would take a bit more hold in the coming decade, but everyone was new agey. And you know what goes with new ageism? Plants. You got to have plants in your house, right? You got to have green plants. And this is an album I picked up about 15 years ago, and I could not believe I found it when I did. It's an album from 1976. It's called Plant Talk, Sound Advice for Houseplants by Molly Roth. I'll say the second side first. The second side is straight instructional, telling you how to care for your plants.
In repotting, never use a pot more than 1 or 2 inches bigger than the present size the plant is in. Repot in something too big, and the plant can sit for months, growing roots like crazy, and putting out exactly 0 above the top of the pot.
First side is the important side. This is the Plant Talk side of the album, where Molly Roth, who has a very smoky voice, let's say, she speaks to your plant. The album is broken up into plants. There are dozens of them, like the Iron Cross begonia, the African violet, the ficus, and she speaks to each of them, assuming she knows their personality. So you get a bit of...
I knew a jade tree once that was 5 feet tall. He was 50 years old, and he cost $600. See what can happen to you, Jade? Oh, Mr. Chevallera, you're going to have a bath. You're covered in red spider mites.
This is probably the weirdest album I own, and I will throw it on occasionally just because of the sheer batshit insanity of it. I don't have any plants, but it works on humans too.
I see, and I thought you were going to go Plantasia on us, which was Mort Garson's record that's supposed to be played for houseplants. Your choice is much weirder and much better than that, so bravo.
That's the thing. I knew that there were tons of albums out there for plants as musically, like you mentioned the Mort Garson one. There are others. There are classical music for house plants and things like that. So when I found this, I'm like, oh, you're kidding, because this is something you'd always heard about. You should talk to your plants. They get used to your voice. Treat them nicely. And so that somebody actually went ahead and did the recording of the album is just fantastic.
What a world we live in. Like, how lucky are we? I'm serious. Like, that's the thing. If anybody listening to this, you're having a bad week, just like, oh my God, like, listen to us and us three alone. You're welcome. But I mean, like, oh my God, this exists. Also, like, knowing that there's individual, I don't know how I missed it being a huge Mort Garson fan. There's individual vinyl albums for each sign. criminy. Like, I don't, that's going to be Discogs, here I come, I guess. I don't.
Yeah, it's crazy because he put out, there were a couple of, he actually put out a single record about the Zodiac. What is it called? It was just, I think it was actually just called the Zodiac. It was credited to the Zodiac, and the album was called Cosmic Sounds. But it's a little, I mean, it's similar. It's a little more kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little more kind of chaotic and all over the place. Whereas the Zodiac series is a little more like you kind of know what you're getting, regardless of which sign you go for. But they're all really, really good. And that could have made my list. But this was just crazy. 12 albums. It's nuts. No, I can't wait to hear that, Father Malone. That's exactly something that I would have probably bought at a used record shop.
100%. That's the kind of record you pray that you find when you're like at a thrift store or a Goodwill, because a lot of times you're just having to go through a lot of copies of like some old Montivani records, some Christian music.
Herb Alpert on a brass.
If you're lucky. Oh my God, if you're lucky, you get Herb Alpert.
All right. This is the moment we've been waiting for. It's quiz time.
Woo!
And we're going to do this. I'm going to switch off. I'm going to start with you, Heather. I'm going to ask you the first question. And we'll just switch off. So we'll go that way this time. Okay. So the first question is true or false. Okay. The celebrated mime Marcel Marceau produced an album of his most famous routines called The Best of Marcel Marceau. True or false?
That is true. And in fact, the bulk of the album is completely silent except for the very last moment where you hear applause.
Technically false. There is an album that exists, but it was not recorded by Marcel Marceau. If you look, his name is actually spelled differently. It's actually spelled Marcel Marceau with an O at the end. It was a parody record released in 1970 by a man named Michael Viner. But you're right. Each side consisted of 19 minutes of silence, followed by a minute of applause. So technically false, but the album does exist.
Well, see, I was testing you, and you passed. So,
Father Malone.
Yo.
Are you ready, sir?
I am.
Okay. Which actor narrated the spoken word LP, The Begatting of the President, which was a satirical summary of LBJ's presidency and Nixon's election in 1968, done in the style of biblical verse? Which actor narrated this LP?
Is this a comedic actor or just a straight up like Steve McQueen?
This is a straight up actor. They don't get more straighter up than this guy.
Then, but it's LBJ. And Nixon? Ronald Reagan.
Nope. Orson Welles.
Oh.
Orson Welles. I have it. It's a terrible album. It's weird, but not good enough to make any of my lists.
And LBJ said, "Let us make war on poverty." And lo, there were welfare checks fallen upon the land, and upon them it was writ, "Fold not, neither shall ye spindle nor mutilate."
Heather, who was the antagonist of Muhammad Ali's 1976 spoken word album, which featured contributions by Frank Sinatra, Howard Cosell, and Richie Havens? Who was the antagonist of this record?
Tooth Decay.
You are right. You absolutely right. It was
Fucking
Mr. Tooth Decay.
I think Andy's got a bad tooth.
Looks like Mr. Tooth Decay has set in already. Oh, he set in already. Better get your dinner floss and your toothbrushes, and let's start right now.
The full title was The Adventures of Ali and His Gang versus Mr. Tooth Decay. It was recorded to raise awareness of tooth decay among children, and it was even officially endorsed by the American Dental Association. Very good.
Hey, that album cover alone is fucking bonkers. Of course I would know this.
Wow. Bravo. Fantastic. All right. It's 1-0, Father Malone.
I think she got the first one too. She's 2-0 here.
2-0. We'll give it to you. A true or false. Timothy Leary recorded a spoken word album with Pete Townsend during Townsend's tax exile in 1970. True or false?
False.
Correct. Although he did record an album called You Can Be Anyone This Time Around. It was not recorded with Townsend. It was recorded to raise funds for Leary's gubernatorial candidacy for the governor of California. And it had Hendrix, it had Buddy Miles, Stephen Stills, and It contained the earliest known examples of sampling on a commercial record.
I'm on the board.
So you're on the board, 2-1. Back to Heather. Which famous DJ was sampled for Negative Land's infamous song, the letter U and the numeral 2?
Casey Kasem.
Yeah.
Complaining
Kasem.
about that poor, it was like, somebody, what does he say? Like, goddamn dead dog.
The dog dying. Yeah. Dog named Snuggles. And he says it was all American Top 40 outtakes that they cut in to like a Muzaki version of I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. But he even
Snuggles.
Snuggles.
Yeah, and they got sued by...
They did. They got sued very aggressively by U2, and it really led to a larger discussion over the use of fair use in entertainment. So it was a very important song, really. But
then
very good.
U2 went around and hired Emergency Broadcast Network to do all of their stuff for their Zoo TV tour. How do you like them apples?
Yeah,
that's true. Well, depending on who you talk to, the Edge, like he pleads like innocence. Like, I didn't tell him to sue anybody. It was our lawyers. They got overzealous. I don't really believe that, but nevertheless, very good. So it's 3-1. You can't win, but maybe you can make a better showing of it, Father Malone. The last question. Steely Dan co-founder Walter Becker collaborated with William S. Burroughs on a track from his 1990 spoken word album Dead City Radio. True or false?
True.
That would be false.
I would have guessed true too. Like
it was. Again, maybe I'm taking liberties with the questions; they're a little tricky. It was Donald Fagen who recorded a song with William Burroughs on that LP. The song was called "A New Standard by Which to Measure Infamy."
His identity is not yet known, though it will in good time. So foul an act as that will out like murder. This man still lives. Surely he was born and saved to set for men a new standard by which to measure infamy and shame.
Sadly, well, not sadly for Heather, because Heather, you won. 3-1.
Congratulations, Heather. You well won. My God, the Ali one alone should have gotten you the title.
I knew that because if you watch the movie When We Were Kings, right before Ali goes to Zaire, he's having an interview and he goes, "We must whoop tooth decay. I got a cavity here and a cavity here." But I didn't know that he recorded an album to combat Mr. Tooth Decay. I think that's fantastic. Now we're going to talk about our second choice for favorite spoken word LP. Because you're the winner, Heather, we're going to go to you. What's your second choice for favorite spoken word album?
Well, my second choice is a key member to a band I alluded to earlier. And this is also a choice that is probably the most classical spoken word of my choices for the evening. And I'm going with Robert Calvert.
This house is washed up on a mountain of rain. The night has made us famous. All around, huge microphones are being tested, and flashbulbs blind our windows.
And his album Centigrade 232. This was him reciting a book of poetry that he'd released earlier. The album came out in 1986. And Robert Calvert, for those who don't know, he is probably best known. He wrote Silver Machine. He was a member of Hawkwind for several years. Fantastic frontman, fantastic writer. He was a poet and a prose writer before he was ever a musician, but just absolutely captivating frontman. He's one of my favorite artists, period. I love Robert Calvert. I think he's really unsung. I mean, I think one could argue that Hawkwind are still kind of underrated, but Calvert especially. And this particular group of poetry is it's beautiful. I mean, Calvert, his voice alone, he has such an interesting voice because it imparts It's in parts it's very rich and has a strength to it and a quirkiness, but there's always like a little tinge where you could tell he's either going to maybe make a little sly comment, like he's like a little witty aside, or even kind of reveal like a really kind of heartbreaking truth. I was about to say tooth, the Ali decay thing is still in my brain, but just like a heartbreaking truth. And he does that both with his voice and his lines. Like, and that takes a special writer and speaker to be able to do that. The cool thing too is that a number of these poems, you can kind of, because they're a lot older than 86, there are seeds that would become songs. Like some of them, there are lines that would be in Hawkwind's Spirit of the Age.
Being a clone, I have no flaws to identify. Even this doggerel that pours from my pen has just been written by another 20 telepathic men, word for word. Oh, for the wings of any bird other than a battery hen.
A clone, I have no flaws to identify. Even this doggerel that pours from my pen has just been written by another 20 telepathic men. Oh, word for word. It says, oh, for the wings of any bird other than a battery hen.
Which is one of the best songs for my money, as well as Robert's first solo effort, Captain Lockheed and the Starfighters, which is a great, great album. If anybody is a fan of just like kind of weird prog, there's actually spoken word bits in that album. Definitely check that out. And the second one was produced by Brian Eno. Was it Leif? The one Lucky Leif. Lucky Leif, it's something. It's got like a crazy long name, but it's so good. Arthur Brown's on Captain Lockheed, as well as a lot of members of Hawkwind, like Nick Turner's on this, Dave Brock. But to go back to Centigrade, I think it's a great collection of poetry. What more do you need? It's compelling, whether he's reciting pieces that are talking about other worlds or something that could be right in the home. His way of telling a story and looking at life is eternally compelling, and there's always a nestle of truth and just sheer clean insight to Robert Calvert's work.
That's fantastic, and I'm familiar with Captain Lockheed and the Starfighters. So, and I'm a huge Hawkwind fan. I was just the other day listening to Warrior on the Edge of Time, which is an amazing album.
Oh, that's actually one of my favorites.
Yeah, Space Ritual too. They just re-released Space Ritual. It's like this huge set. But no, that's I'll have to. What was the name of that album again for the Robert Calvert album?
Oh, Centigrade 232.
I'm definitely gonna check that out. Father Malone, second pick, favorite spoken word.
Okay, this is actually my favorite spoken word. The Del Close one was up there, but this is the actual favorite. And let me peel back the curtain here for our listeners. As soon as HP announced what this subject was, my brain screamed, "Don't get scooped by these two. Speak up now." and thus I present to you Ken Nordine's Colors. Now, this was, I mentioned How to Speak Hip. I had first heard on that Research Incredibly Strange Music Volume 2. That same album features 3 tracks from this album. Ken Nordine, who is he? He's a gift. That's who he is. He did voiceover work for commercials and trailers.
"No, I must go to other towns," he said, and he left us with our new Levi's.
He was Linda Blair's vocal coach for The Exorcist. He worked with the Grateful Dead and Billy Vaughn. He appeared on The Tonight Show and Sesame Street. And in 1967, he was hired by the Fuller Paint Company to write and perform and produce 10 radio ads about colors. 9 colors, and one was about the spectrum.
King Purple feels there's a right that is his, that goes way, way back to beginning, to the place where pomp began. That is purple pomp.
The ads ran, and then the strangest thing happened. People started calling in, requesting to hear them again, which is an impossibility given that they were paid advertisements. You can't give free advertising after they paid. But the popularity was not lost on Ken Nordine, who then expanded the idea of 10 up to 34, 44 actually originally, before they put it. So what we get are jazz number tracks. Each track is about 1.5 to 2 minutes tops. each expounding the joys and sorrows and wonders of colors, sometimes speaking to the color, sometimes speaking about the color.
Seems that green, you know how green can be, didn't want yellow in. Some silly primal envy, I suppose, but for whatever cause, the effect was bad on yellow and caused yellow to weep yellow tears for several eternals before there were years.
It is hypnotic in ways you can't believe. Ken Nordine has one of the greatest voices of all time. The fact that he's not as well known as my next weird album choice is shocking to me. He was on the radio for many, many years. He first got sort of notoriety when he released an album called Word Jazz, which is the sort of proto version of Colors. That was back in the 50s, I think. But that's more spoken word, like he was telling stories. And he continued to do that for the majority of his career and the albums he put out. But Colors is a little more specific. It's a little more just straight poetry, even if it sounds like prose at times. My girlfriend had never heard of Ken Nordine, didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And I said, it's this album, this guy he's talking about colors. And they put like some bebop jazz behind him. And she's like, that's ridiculous. And I said, yeah, here, listen to one. She's like, oh, that was good. Play another one. I'm like, oh, really? So yeah, play another one. Her name is Amber, and there's a track named Amber, and it's not the best track on the album. I felt so bad. It's just okay. It's, it's like a stoic. It's comparing amber to like the amber of a stoplight.
Amber from its vantage winks among the many millions stops and goes, because amber knows from the bottom of its amber that even creatures made in God's image, even something as smart and as special and as serious as that, has to be told when to stop.
It's no yellow, it's no green, it's no olive, which are featured on the album. It makes you feel groovy, even if you're not.
And those of us who are maybe a little bit older will also remember that Ken Nordine was the voice of Taster's Choice, the coffee commercials. This rich, sort of bassy, reassuring voice, that was Ken Nordine.
Taster's Choice looks and smells like ground roast and tastes fresh perked.
I cannot love this choice anymore, Father Malone. Obviously, I was vexed by the fact that you swooped in and took him from me, but it's such a worthy choice. A few years ago, they put out a collection of all the Word Jazz albums onto a double disc set, and I cherish it. Flippity Jib is a fantastic track. The Vidiot, like you say, it's more storytelling, and some of them are funny, some of them are a bit shocking, some are even a little bit sad in places, but he's so magnetic. His delivery is so unique, but Colors it's peak Ken Nordine. It's fantastic.
He's so comforting, even at his most chilling, because he's got some chillers in the early albums, but it still always feels like, it's all right, I've got you.
Yeah, his voice is what kind of grabs you and pulls you in, but his mind and his storytelling and the stories that he comes up with, it's completely offbeat and off kilter and off center and just wonderful. Actually, interestingly, my second choice for favorite spoken word album, in a funny way, it kind of, to use your same turn of a phrase, it dovetails into what you just went through, Father Malone. My second choice is a record called Journeys Inside the Mind, Poitier meets Plato. It's from 1964. It's Sidney Poitier reading the dialogues of Plato over a jazz backing led by Fred Katz.
Until political greatness and wisdom meet in one ruler, and those commoner natures who pursue either attribute to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside, cities will never have rest from evils, no, nor the human race. Then, only then, will our state have a possibility of life and behold the light of day.
This was a record I first came across. A lot of these records and a lot of the stuff I came across in late night crate digging sessions. I was the music director at my dorm's radio station in college, and we had a massive record collection, this closet. It would just go on forever. And some nights, if I didn't want to go to bed or couldn't sleep, I would go up there, just go through the stacks. And this was one of those records that I came across. it was obviously people should know who Sidney Poitier is or was. He was the groundbreaking Academy Award-winning actor and civil rights activist. Everyone should know who this man is. Fred Katz, on the other hand, was an American cellist and composer who was once described as the first real jazz cellist. He composed the music, among other things. He composed the music for Roger Corman's Bucket of Blood movie. Which, oddly enough, also appeared in 7 other Corman movies. So I guess his music got reused a lot there. He was the professor of ethnic music at California State University, and one of his students was John Densmore of The Doors.
Wow.
A little bit of trivia there. The record consists of Poitier reading these dialogues of Plato over the sort of hipster backing, jazz backing music composed by Katz. And Poitier simply has one of the smoothest, most beautiful voices that you could ever want to hear. He was obviously a wonderful actor, but his sort of reciting of these dialogues is transfixing. And despite the incongruity of the subject, it's really well matched by the lively jazz compositions on display. And I could hear Poitier read the phone book and I would be just as transfixed.
This knowledge was lost at birth, but may be recovered by the use of the senses. So learning is really an act of recovering by recollection, and our souls existed without bodies before they were in the form of man and must have had intelligence.
It's such a weird combination of confluence of ingredients, but it really works. Some jazz and Poitier with Plato mixed in, you can't go wrong. I believe archive.org has a digital copy that you can listen to. And of course, it's on YouTube. Let's go into our final choice for weirdest spoken word album. Let's start with you, Father Malone. What's your pick for the weirdest?
Solomon Fries. Paul to his pals. Guy had a 4-octave vocal range. Started in vaudeville in the 30s as Buddy Green doing impressions. In the 40s, he was a voiceover man par excellence on shows like Crime Classics and Gunsmoke. He provided the ADR for Humphrey Bogart in his final film, The Harder They Fall, when he was unable to complete the dialogue due to ill health.
Wow.
He worked for every animation company, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, Walter Lantz, Hanna-Barbera, on and on and on. He was Boris Badenoff on Rocky and Bullwinkle.
I like it!
He was John Lennon and George Harrison in the Beatles cartoon.
Look at this lovely picnic casket they packed for us.
He was Burgermeister Meisterburger in Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
I hate toys, and toys hate me.
He passed away in 1986, and yet he's still performing day in, day out, Disney World and Disneyland on the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Dead men tell no tales.
That's Paul Fries, but he'll always be the ghost host of the Haunted Mansion.
Take 2 from Welcome, Foolish Mortals. I may as well give you another one, right? You want it.
Kind of very good.
Welcome, foolish mortals.
Find a way out! Paul Fries is who we're talking about. In 1971, somebody thought it was a really good idea to release an album of Mr. Fries, and I couldn't agree more. He's fantastic. Why wouldn't we memorialize him? The result is Paul Fries and the Poster People. It is an album of then contemporary songs, each interpreted by Paul Fries. Now, that description is tantalizing enough to hear him singing those songs. Oh, but you have no idea. See, each of the songs is done in the speak-singing style, spoken word, if you will, in the manner of Mr. Fries' many impressions. So, yes, you get Bela Lugosi performing games people play.
And they while away the hour in their ivory tower till they're covered up with flour.
Oh, yeah. My personal favorite on the album is Sugar Sugar, as essayed by Sidney Greenstreet.
Honey, sugar, sugar. You are my candy girl. And you've got me wanting you.
What?
It's
crazy.
I can't, but everyone will want to hear him. Hey Jude by Peter Lorre. You have no idea how wonderful this is.
Hey Jude, don't be afraid.
You were made to go out and get her. And the minute you let her under your skin, then you begin to make it better.
The final track on the album is Everything is Beautiful, where Paul Frees cycles through all of his impressions. Look, I have to warn everybody, if you're going to go pick up this album, the Let It Be cover, which should be a fantastic cover. I saw the title of the track and went, oh my God, this is going to be great. He's doing it as Warner Orland.
Oh my God.
It's Charlie Chan. So
yeah.
It hasn't aged well. You might want to just skip that one. Don't skip Mama Told Me Not to Come by W.C. Field.
That ain't the way to have fun. Open up the window. Let some air into this room.
Fucking mind-blowing. I love it.
Crazy. I had no idea this, because I love Paul Frees. I didn't know this existed. That's amazing.
Seriously, I had no idea either. I love Paul Frees too. Like, holy shit.
It was quite a revelation when I found this album.
Yeah. I think Paul Frees he was also an undercover narcotics agent back then. I think he was the one who inspired Elvis to want to be, remember that famous Elvis Meets Nixon? He's the one who inspired Elvis to want to become an undercover narc himself. But not a lot of people knew that about him.
Paul Frees directed one movie called The Beatniks. It's like some slightly right-wing screed, but who cares? Paul Frees is the Haunted Mansion guy.
It was an album. It could have. I was tempted to add it to this list, but it's more comedy than spoken word. Stan Freberg had an album called Stan Freberg Presents the United States of America, Volume 1, and Paul Frees is the narrator of that. It's basically like a song and dance history of the U.S. up to that point. But Paul Frees is just unmistakable. We have a lot of great voices represented in this particular. I didn't expect that, but that's awesome. So I'm gonna take the next spot. I'm gonna go with my second choice for weirdest LP. This one, I can almost guarantee neither of you have heard of it. I'm pretty certain of that. It's an album called Basic Black (parentheses) A Poetical Odyssey Through Inhumanity by a fellow named Jason Black. That's Jayson Black. This was another record that I came across in my late night crate digging in the record stack of my radio station in college. And what drew me to it was the cover is, and I said, I have to see what this is all about. The cover is a rather blank-faced man who kind of looks a little like Mr. Spock. He's wearing a robe and he's sitting lotus style in front of what looks like two sort of Greek arches, but he's got the weirdest expression on his face. And I said, well, this is weird. But then I turned it over and this really sealed the deal for me to want to listen to it. An excerpt of the what's printed on the back, it says, Jason Black should be arrested for exposing himself in public. What he exposes is not pretty to look at. It's not pleasant to hear. And the aroma is definitely offensive to lofty nostrils. Okay. And then further down, it says, Jason Black has been an alcoholic since he was 11 years old. He has been in 12 mental institutions. He was a patient at Chicago State Hospital as recently as February 1969. WCFL's all-night disc jockey Stan Dale found Jason Black at Chicago State and was appalled at the conditions in which humans were condemned. He placed Jason in a Veterans Administration hospital where he is now an outpatient. I'm reading this going, what is this? This is insane. Like, this is usually the back of an album is about lyrics or groovy text about whatever. This is all about how awful this guy's life is and how miserable everything is around him. So I said, of course I have to hear this. This is insane.
I am cheese, strangely at ease in my red cellophane wrapper. It is cool here on the shelf, unmolested, but the smell inside is bad. Can it be me?
So evidently, from what I could gather, Jason Black would go on this DJ Stan Dale's all-night program and he would read his poetry, where I would assume he then was able to make the leap to laying it down on wax, if you will. Song titles include Social Workers and Other Fools, A Garret for Failure, Showdown with Nighttime, and my personal favorite title, Inquisitorial Exorcism, which would actually make a good band name if you think about it. Almost all of those would.
Yeah.
But so there's no music backing per se. It's mostly just his voice reciting these poems. But there's sounds that appear to come from, and actually I'm pretty certain, like they come from a generic sound effects record of the day, because like one of them begins with the sound of a woman screaming. And I know I've heard the same scream in one of my Superman read-along storybook records, like a record of sound effects that they just threw on to dress up this guy's poetry recitations. But his voice is pretty amazing. He sort of seems like he's seething with anger, but he's also rather clear and lucid, which I wasn't expecting, given that he sounds like a mental patient, a literal mental patient. But all these years I've puzzled over this record. Who was this guy really? Was he really as damaged as it seems from the copy on the record and his poems? And how did this record end up in the archives of a college radio station? It baffles me, because it's not a major label. It's some label out of Chicago. And I went to school in Indiana, so probably the close proximity, maybe that's how it ended up there. But it's a very oddball. They don't get more oddball than this. Although I think your Reading to Plants probably takes the cake there. But I think this guy had some pretty severe issues going on, and a lot of that's reflected in the poetry. And like I said, it doesn't get weirder than this. And Jason Black, you will not find it on Spotify, in case you were wondering. I don't know where this ended up or where this guy ended up. So that's my second choice. Finally, Heather.
Wow.
It's all been leading up to this moment. What is your final choice for weirdest spoken word album?
I had to pick. This is not only a weird one, this is a huge favorite of mine. This is an artist I have written about before, a pioneer who I think has largely gone unsung, which is part of the reason why I did an article, because more people need to know about her. And I'm going with Ruth White and her album, Flowers of Evil.
Let us pursue the distant mirage of the blue crystals of the mind. Gently down the stellar keep room. Parallel desires swimming side by side on your fly, without rest or respite, straight into the paradise of my dreams.
And this was, as one may guess from the title, this is an adaptation of the poetry of Charles Baudelaire, done in a absolutely groundbreaking manner. The seeds of what you would later on hear, because this is 1969, Ruth is doing techniques and sounds here that you would go on to hear bands like Throbbing Gristle integrate. And the way that she's modulating her voice, it sounds at times like she's a literal specter trying to communicate to you from like another realm, like through a mirror or something. Like, it's absolutely, I've seen this one pop up a lot on people's like creepy lists. Of course, a lot of things that I find soothing and fascinating, I think tend to make it on people's creepy lists, but I think it's a stunning work. Ruth is one of the original innovators with the mode, which she doesn't get mentioned a lot, and she should. She did a lot of compositional work for children's records, which I think also is probably one of the reasons why she tends not to get mentioned. It's kind of weird when we think of things that are creative and expressive that society kind of throws away and doesn't take seriously, and like educational stuff, which I would say in some ways some of the educational stuff that was created in the 60s and 70s is fascinating and very much creative and artistic. But stuff for kids isn't valued, but just maybe you should value it, because it's literally what you're having your children like watch and listen to and read. But Ruth's backstory is also fascinating. She studied as a college student under another composer named George Antheil. And George, if she's fascinated in George, his backstory, he's another groundbreaker, but an avant-garde composer, was considered the bad boy of avant-garde in the 1920s. His Paris debut in 1925 literally incited a riot. And at one point he pulled a revolver out of his pocket and just put it on top of the piano. Like, he would do, this is a man after my own heart. Like, we're painting with my colors now. This is so just perfection. And so, but think about it, like, Ruth is studying under this guy. And just, I adore this woman so much. I mean, and I think now we're finally starting to get near where people kind of know who Wendy Carlos is and Delia Derbyshire. Of course, what helps is Delia's got the Doctor Who connection and Wendy's got the Shining. And so, and that's not to downplay, they're both fucking brilliant and they're both great. And everybody should listen to everything those women have done as well. But also listen to some Ruth White, and especially this album.
You give the outlaw that serene and haughty smile that damns an entire nation thronging round the guillotine. You who know in what corners of the greedy earth the jealous god hid precious stones. You whose bright eye knows the deep arsenals where slumbers the race of metals.
Because before Ruth, there were like a few adaptations of Baudelaire to record, but they're more sort of standard, just, which is nothing wrong with that. What's fascinating is one of them was Robert Goulet. I'm sorry, Robert Goulet reading Baudelaire is, it tickles me. I can't help it. But I like to think there's like some version of Story of the Eye out there by George Bataille that has a Goulet vocal intonation on. But yeah, Ruth White, absolute legend, groundbreaker, genius. This is one of the most sonically brilliant albums I've ever heard, and it could not ever be praised enough.
I'm unfamiliar with it. I feel ashamed.
Oh, no shame. Oh my God, are you kidding after your picks? No shame. No shame for any of us. I am so smitten with all of our picks. I usually am. That's, I love my Noise Junkies, but holy shit. This episode, what a powerhouse. And the fact that we can all like not only turn our humble, wonderful listeners, hello, thank you for still listening, but also each other. Like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And Ruth's stuff is on Spotify, so it is accessible. And of course, if you like it, I believe the CDs are still in print through her company, which I believe was called, they're still around. So you can support physical media if you like what you're hearing on Spotify. So
that's been, I have Robert Goulet stuck in my head. I'm going to have to feverishly start looking for Baudelaire by
Holy Cannoli, right? This Robert Goulet, just with that stash and that sort of slightly sleazy but lovable essence, he seems kind of perfect for Baudelaire.
Are you sure this is the casino? I think I should call my manager.
Your manager says for you to shut up!
Vera said that?
Fantastic. So that will do it for this episode, for the spoken word episode. Let's go around a little bit. Heather, when you're not listening to music with your fellow noise junkies, where can people find your material?
Well, I have a link tree, and it's linktree.com/Mondo Heather. And there you'll find links to my website, mondoheather.com, my Patreon, Mondo Heather, my social media, other podcasts I'm on, which are also on the Weirding Way Media, which we are also on, including the Culture Cast and Bollywood Cinema Club, which I appear on. I also recently reviewed for my website a shot-on-video horror movie called Splatter Farm from 1987 that's really very cool, like very sort of like arty, but also art gore film made by literal teenagers, and it has so much heart and charm and great composition, and it's intriguing. And so do check that article out. And you can also just find all my stuff there. Linktree.com/Mondo Heather.
And you, Father Malone, where can people, give us some information on where people can find you when you're not hanging out with the Noise Junkies.
You want to see my visual nonsense, go to fathermalone.com. If you want to hear me, go to Weirding Way Media, where I host a show called Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, where we're wrapping up our look at Night Gallery, Rod Serling's series. in preparation for Tales from the Dark Side. We start recording very soon. So check out Midnight Viewing. Also, I have a show called Dark Destinations. It's a half-hour radio drama, not necessarily spoken word, but it is a lot of people talking and a lot of sound effects. So, and music by HP.
I would echo, as I often do, I love Dark Destinations. If you love good audio drama, good storytelling, you can't go wrong there. As for myself, I am also among the galaxy of personalities on the Weirding Way Media Network. I do a podcast with Father Malone called Night Mr. Walters, a taxi podcast. I'm also an occasional guest on the Culture Cast. And also I have a Bandcamp site, hpmusicplace.bandcamp.com. If you want to hear some of the audio nonsense I've cooked up, there's not a lot there now, but hoping to add more and more good stuff as time allows. But anyway, thank you both for everything. Thank you for this wonderful treat of audio, spoken word audio choices here. P for Heather and for Father Malone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.